2025. Sorry. Thank you, Hunter. Good afternoon. The February 6th, 2025 Rider Experience and Operations Committee meeting is now called to order. I am Christina Walker, the REO Committee Chair. I want to welcome everyone attending the meeting, both in person and via Zoom. For committee members joining through Zoom, please turn on your camera and state your name prior to making any comments or asking any questions so the public and your fellow committee members know who is speaking. Hunter, will you please call the roll?
Angela Burney.
Here.
Board Member Burney is present. Christine Frizzell. Ed Prince.
Here.
Board Member Prince is present. Kim Roscoe.
Here.
Board Member Roscoe is present. Pete von Reichbauer. Gurmai Zahalai.
Present.
Board Member Zahalai is present. And Christina Walker.
Here.
And Madam Chair, a quorum is present at this time.
Great, thank you, Hunter. And I don't have a report of the chair today, so I'm going to kick it right over to our CEO, Jeroen Sparman.
Good afternoon, Chair Walker, and thank you. And also good afternoon to the members of the committee. Thank you. I have two items today as part of the CEO report, and it's related to the operational resiliency study that we have underway that you've heard me speak about repeatedly at these meetings. And I also have some issues I want to touch on very briefly pertaining to our sounder service disruptions as well. First, updating on the addressing our link resiliency issues, which has been a work that has been underway for the last 4 to 5 months, and we're making good progress. And as you recall, at our last full board meeting 2 weeks ago, the board ratified my finding of an emergency order to rapidly implement an operational resiliency assessment for critical system components of the Link Light Rail system. Because of this support, thank you to the board, I am pleased to report that we have maintained our urgent pace and progress on the system's resiliency-related work. We are one step closer to presenting you with detailed findings and recommendations, which will happen at next month's REO committee meeting. That's actually going to be a pretty significant presentation by staff. Today, I simply want to provide you a very brief update on what you can expect at the next REO committee meeting in terms of the system's resiliency assessment itself. So if I can ask for slide 1 to come up, thank you. First, this is a very quick reminder of the timeline around this work. This slide provides a high-level overview of the major deliverables and actions included in our response to all the things we've been seeing happening, especially after we opened revenue service to Linwood. During the March REO committee meeting, we will present findings from the system's resiliency assessment as well as the agency implementation plan, both of which are identified on this timeline chart. As you can see on the timeline in blue, the system's resiliency assessment is being finalized this month, February. At the same time, we are also developing the agency implementation plan because we want to expedite these critical efforts as quickly as possible. And of course, the implementation plan is what are we going to do about the findings through this that we have identified through the assessment. I want to acknowledge that many immediate repairs have already been taking place, both by our team and with our partners at King County Metro, who actually operate and maintain parts of our system. So we are seeing effective action already happening. On the next slide, if I can call that up, I just want to talk briefly about the scope of the system's resiliency assessments. And again, you will at the next REO committee meeting in early March see much more detail around this. But let me just touch on this. Operating partnership and organizational changes, including how sound transit is structured internally, as well as externally in relation to our operating partners at King County, is a key area where we have additional findings we need to share with the board. Asset management, including the practices and procedures we use to inspect and maintain our assets, preferably at a state of good repair, is of course an absolutely key issue as we go forward. Standards and procedures are the documents that prescribe what we design, how we construct, and how we verify that our assets are at that state of good repair where we need them to be. Long-range planning involves starting studies to implement changes to the system, to adapt to climate change, adding track crossovers, and upgrading utility connections. These are some examples that are more long-range in nature that we need to do again to strengthen our operational resiliency going forward. Our system's operational networks include many of the very complex components that we've discussed with you over the last few months, such as traction power, train control, signals, emergency ventilation and fire systems, automation, monitoring, and additional facets. And again, they are, of course, key and instrumental in making sure we have the system we need. And finally, projects in construction includes how we use our recent findings and all the work we've done over the last 3 to 4 months to make sure that as we implement new projects and new service, that we bring in those lessons learned into the projects now, so that we get the benefit of that in the years to come. Ultimately, we will share a prioritized list of the findings across these 6 major categories, and then we will update you with recommendations for critical action at our next committee meeting. And frankly, I look forward to having that full presentation and the feedback we will get from the board, I'm sure, at that point in time. Moving to my second subject very quickly, I just want to acknowledge that recently, we occasionally do have service interruptions to our commuter rail program as well. And that's, of course, a Sounder service going both south past the city of Tacoma in Pierce County and north to Snohomish County, city of Everett. Especially yesterday, very unfortunately, there was a fatal accident that impacted Amtrak service, not us. We've also had other accidents impacting Burlington Northern freight service. And the reality is that because we all operate on 1 to 2 tracks, any service disruptions to our freight system with Burlington Northern or Amtrak service actually impacts our service as well, because obviously if service is stopped, our trains can't pass by. We also do have a significant maintenance challenge with our Sounder system. Amtrak, which actually is a contract partner to inspect and maintain our Sounder vehicle fleet, are by FRA regulations required to do a lot of work. They are facing some labor shortages, and that actually does occasionally impact us. And I know tonight and tomorrow we're canceling one particular train in the Sounder North system because of those reasons. So I just wanted to share with the board that and acknowledge that this is playing out. It will continue to play out, and of course we always look for ways to mitigate those impacts as much as we can and make sure that our customers, the traveling public, knows about these service disruptions as quickly as possible. That concludes my comments, so I'll hand it back to you, Chair Walker.
Great, thank you, Jeroen. What questions do folks have for our CEO? I have one question. You put up the slide with the 6 boxes, and so different categories, and you said that you would be coming back to share the prioritized list of findings. So is that something that this committee will put forward to the board? Is that something the board will vote on, or is it just going to be an administrative? And then secondly, how are we funding all of these things?
Those are great questions, and I'm going to try to be very succinct in my answer. First of all, yes, so this report to the RIO committee meeting at the March RIO committee meeting is an administrative function. We're just sharing with you, here's what we have found, and here's what we're doing about it. There will be longer-term financial implications as we increase our expenditures to make sure we tackle these problems, especially when it comes to the infrastructure components of this. And of course, financial decisions ultimately goes through the full board as it has budgetary implications. So this is something that we will have to deal with for the long term.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, looking forward to that report next month. We're going to move on now to public comment. The Rider Experience and Operations Committee welcomes public comment as an important part of the public process. Comments are received and considered by the committee in its deliberations. Hunter, what types of comments were received for today's meeting?
Madam Chair, we have no written comments or in-person signups, but we do have one virtual commenter.
Great. So before we take virtual public comment, I just want to review our ground rules. Each commenter will have 2 minutes. Speakers should comment only on the action they identified on the sign-up sheet and stay within the allotted time. All comments must be germane to the agenda items or items within the committee's purview. Speakers should not make introductory statements or derogatory remarks, profanity, or personal attacks not germane to an agenda item, and statements related to a political campaign or statements for or against a candidate or a ballot measure. Speakers should also not engage in conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of this meeting, including conduct that is not germane to the committee's agenda or work. This is the only warning speakers will receive, and if these rules are not followed, I will ask for the microphone to be turned off. Appreciate your adherence to the rules. I'll now turn it over to you, Hunter, to call on our commenter.
Our one virtual commenter signed up for public comment is William Burns. If you're in the audience, please raise your hand and we will send a notice to unmute. Please accept the notice to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is William Burns. I'm also called Kit Burns personally, but I live in Tacoma. I want to talk about the writer experience and bring that a couple items to your attention. I'm an experienced architect, and I've noticed on some of the lines over the years, I'm not happy with the writer experience. And specifically, I want to bring the attention just of one segment of the track from Rainier Beach to Tukwila Station. I find that when you ride that station, you get racked about or thrown about. And on a project that costs as much as this, that shouldn't be. I think there's a problem with quality issues when the track isn't straight and the ride isn't smooth. In 1990, France developed a high-speed rail where you can go 186 miles an hour. And we should be able to do that too, particularly at the amount of money we're spending. Additionally, on the new link rail, just the segment of MLK, even that track on that short distance is not smooth. So I'd hope everybody on the committee would actually ride that and get a sense and that feel for what I'm talking about. On another rider experience too, I put a lot of thought, and I'll put I have put some comments in on the Tacoma Dome Link extension. The best option is the 26th Street station. The other three stations on 25th Street, they all have fatal flaws. They have stopping of the line, delays, unknown costs, conflicts with Amtrak, conflicts with the Sounder. When you look in plan at the 26th Street station, you'll see how easy it will be for attendees to attend the Tacoma Dome Station events, but also to get on the Sounder, get on Amtrak, and get on the Tacoma Link. So anyway, that's the 26th Street station. I hope you put some careful thought into that. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Kit. Any other commenters, Hunter? Thank you. We'll go ahead and close public comment. We're going to move on to our business items. There's 3 business items on the agenda today, 2 for committee final action and 1 for recommendation to the board. Starting with our minutes, the January 16th, 2025 Rider Experience and Operations Committee meeting minutes, I will entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Madam Chair, Prince, so moved.
And this is Bernie. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Moving on to motion number M 2025-07. And we have Jason Heaverlow in person. All right. Our senior leasing document coordinator to provide the presentation on granting Seattle City Light a permanent easement near Shoreline South Station.
Good afternoon, Chair Walker, committee members, Chairman Sporman. I'm here today seeking REO committee approval to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to execute an agreement with Seattle City Light for permanent easement for the development of electrical infrastructure for an authorized amount of $520 being paid to Sound Transit. The size of the easement area is approximately 160 square feet at Sound Transit property located at 3rd Avenue Northeast in Shoreline, Washington, for arterial electrical infrastructure to maintain electrical service to an adjacent residence. Sound Transit's Real Property Utilization Committee concluded that the proposed easement will have no impact on the property. Seattle City Light provided an appraisal in the amount of $520, which was reviewed by the Sound Transit Appraisal Department and deemed fair market value. This action is within the committee's authority for approval. The board's procurement agreement and delegation authority policy allows committees to approve permanent easements when the financial obligation for either party is under $5 million and the easement does not deprive or substantially limit Sound Transit's use of essential property. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. And I know we talked about this ahead of time, but every easement that Sound Transit does has to come through the board.
The permanent, yes. And the latter was the language that legal would like me to read today.
Great, thank you. Just want to be really clear about that because I know a lot of our listening audience and our constituents have called board members and asked questions about when we use, when we take easements and things like that. And so just to be very clear, even a $520 easement has to come before the board.
Because it's permanent, yes.
Thank you to be clear about the permanent part of that. Board Member Bernie, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It was basically the same comment you just made, Chair, was that first, thanks for clarifying $520 because what a small amount of money, but so thank you for that. But also that easements have to go through us. So thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Bernie. We were on the same wavelength. Any other questions for our presenter? Okay, we're going to have Hunter read the action into the record before we ask for a motion. Hunter.
Motion number M 2025-07, a motion of the Rider Experience and Operations Committee of the Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority authorizing the Chief Executive Officer to execute an agreement granting Seattle City Light a permanent easement for the development of electrical infrastructure for a total authorized amount of $520 to be paid to Sound Transit.
Great, thank you. I'll now ask for a motion to adopt motion
Madam
number M
Chair.
2025.07. Go ahead.
Prince, so moved.
And this is Bernie. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Thank you. Any final questions or comments? We're all good. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Moving on to items for recommendation to the board, we have motion number M 2025-08, and I'll turn it right back to you, Jason. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm seeking REO committee approval to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to execute a license agreement with Microsoft Corporation to use 2 bus bays in the shuttle loop at Redmond Technology Center for transit vehicle queuing. The total authorized amount of approximately $3,160,928 being paid to Sound Transit. Approximately $507,000 of that amount is the license fee and leasehold tax, and approximately $2.6 million of this amount is being reimbursed for actual operations and maintenance expenses based off of Microsoft's 44% pro rata share of the common access area, including the bus bays and the shuttle loop at RTS. The license fee was determined by an appraisal procured by Sound Transit. The license fee during the initial term will be prorated from the license commencement date through August 31st of 2025, and thereafter will be paid annually with 3% annual increases commencing on September 1st of 2025. The term of the agreement will be 10 years with a 3% annual increase, including 3 additional 10-year options to renew. The license fee for any renewal will also be paid annually with a 3% annual increase. The license fee will also be determined by an appraisal of fair market rent. There's a 90-day termination option by either party. In 2023, the Microsoft and Sound Transit parties executed an interim license allowing Microsoft to use the newly constructed RTS bus bays and shuttle loop until the parties could establish the fee and terms for the long-term license, which terminates February 28th, 2025. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason on this motion? All right, seeing none, I will ask Hunter to read the action into the record.
Motion number M 2025-08, a motion of the Board of the Central Puget Sound Regional Transit Authority authorizing the Chief Executive Officer to execute a license agreement with Microsoft Corporation for Microsoft's use of 2 bus bays and the shuttle loop at Redmond Technology Station for transit vehicle queuing for a total authorized amount of approximately $3,160,928 paid to Sound Transit.
Great, thank you. I will now entertain a motion to forward this to the full board with a due pass recommendation.
Madam Chair, so moved. Prince.
And this is Bernie. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any question or discussion before we call the vote? All right, looks like we've got it all covered. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. We'll now move on to our reports to the committee. Thank you, Jason. Move on to the
You're welcome.
reports to the committee. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Board Member Frizzell, I think that's you.
It is. I just wanted to say that I've got some technical difficulties, but I've been in the meeting for about 10 minutes, so.
Oh, great.
Carry
Thank
on.
you. We've got you recorded. Thank you. All right. We are going to start with our passenger impact program with Pamela Wren, our service delivery deputy project director. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Walker, committee members. My name is Pam Wren, and I'm here today to report on the Passenger Impact Program to the committee. The intent of this program is to ensure that service for our riders remains a priority. We balance the need for construction with service to passengers by working closely with our partners in operations and passenger experience to minimize the impact of planned disruptions on our riders. This includes packaging as much work as possible. Next slide. As much work as possible into individual planned closures and scheduling them at times when they'll have fewer impacts. We also fit emerging work such as resiliency improvements into the calendar. Today's report will provide an update on the series of major disruptions currently underway and also review changes since the last report to work in the remainder of 2025 and 2026. Next slide. The graphic presented on this slide shows the work underway during January and February of 2025. There are three major efforts, which I will mention in turn, starting from the bottom of the graphic. As the presentation continues, I'll discuss each in more detail. First, the Pinehurst Station project continues to apply roofing materials until February 27th. Second, the EastLink project is continuing the series of weekend downtown tunnel closures they began in November 2024 to complete systems tie-in of the 1 and 2 lines. Finally, we completed repairs to the overhead contact system at UW Station last weekend. An update to this graphic shows that the washed out northbound I-5 lane closures that were planned to start the weekend of March 1st have been postponed until sometime in 2026 or 2027. Now let's briefly discuss each of these projects underway. Next slide. I'd like to start by reviewing the Pinehurst Station roofing work that started January 4th. Continuing weather impacts will likely cause this work to extend beyond the original end date of February 27th. A new schedule due shortly will show the impacts of this current week, for example, when no roofing work could be done due to ice and snow. During this work at Pinehurst, riders are being served by single tracking from 5:30 p.m. to 4 a.m. on Monday through Friday and several full weekends. Next slide. Next, I'd like to turn to the continuation of the 2-line tie-in to the downtown tunnel. The last weekend when we had a closure on January 17th to 19th was successful, and the tunnel was open to service as expected on Monday morning, January 20th. However, due to an underlying fiber connection issue discovered during the disruption event, certain testing activities remain to be finalized. The team is working on scheduling these now and will report on this activity during the next RIO update. The next weekend impact starting February 14th requires a full closure of the downtown tunnel from 10 p.m. Friday to the start of morning service on Monday. During this upcoming closure, the project will be testing signal system connections between the 1 and 2 lines. Trains will be running between the downtown tunnel and Judkins Park Station. The team is still holding 2 contingency weekends in case of unexpected complications with the work, or if one of the previous weekends must be canceled due to weather. We are likely to move the contingency weekend, which is not actually shown on here, but it is the second contingency that we're holding, which was March 8th, the weekend of March 8th. We will move that back to the weekend of February 28th in order to avoid a Sounders game the weekend of the 8th. Next slide. This graphic shows the bus shuttle service for the weekend of February 14th between Capitol Hill and Soto stations. Buses will be running on 10 to 15-minute headways with train service to the north and south. The same service plan will be used for contingency weekends if needed. Next slide. To wrap up discussion of work during the current disruption event, this past weekend, the team completed OCS repairs during a full closure between U District and Capitol Hill stations. This work repaired overhead contact system wiring in the vicinity of the University of Washington station. This work also addressed the slow order in the UW area, and trains have now gone back to regular speed. The work also preventatively repaired wire that was wearing too fast, addressing system resiliency. Next slide. Now we'll turn to work we are considering fitting into the current closure period. As I mentioned previously, the team is holding 2 contingency weekends for the EastLink tie-in in case they are needed for any reason. If those weekends are not needed, we are planning to include a portion of our ongoing safety and resiliency work in one of those downtown tunnel closures. These are projects that could be done during non-revenue periods, but require a long time to complete in that manner. And examples are fiber and sewer surveys, which need to access areas above the overhead contact system and in the trackway to complete their work. Next slide. Looking ahead to Q2, we will schedule work to complete the Pinehurst Station stairwell. One stairwell at the station is in close proximity to the overhead contact system, excuse me, and work must be completed while the wires are powered down. We intend to use the same single tracking configuration that is currently being used for roofing to advance the stairwell work. The current plan is for 4 weeks of impact, but the team is attempting to shorten this impact. As we move into the spring, the challenge will be to avoid baseball and soccer crowds traveling home on certain weekdays. We'll report on this also at the next RIO meeting. Next slide. Turning to impacts in the remainder of 2025, and into 2026, you can see on the graphic that we have several items that we're trying to plan around. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, WashDOT has postponed long-term lane closures on I-5 north of Seattle between March and October. So that's no longer shown on the graphic. And the new impact dates are not yet scheduled, so they are not appearing on this graphic yet. We are still planning around the Club World Cup and World Cup soccer tournaments in 2025 and 2026, and many other typical summer and fall events in the community, which don't show up here either, but we definitely work around them. We do expect safety and resiliency project work to progress during the year, and some of this work may have impacts to service. We continue to work with project teams to minimize impacts and fit them between community events. For example, the graphic shows the pedestrian crossing gate project as having impacts during much of 2025 and 2026. However, that team's service impacts are not yet defined and will likely be quite a bit less than what is shown here. As more details are known, this graphic will be updated. Another thing I want to note is that the team is attempting to accelerate major downtown tunnel impacts for rail and emergency system cable replacement and complete that work before Eastlink service starts later this year. Last time I was here, we showed that in January 2026. The impact has now been penciled in for July and August of 2025. Sorry, the big reveal. But those dates are still being finalized, and we are trying to pull this work even further back into the spring. Next slide. To conclude, we are presently fully engaged in completing the work during January and February safely and on time, although weather impacts are causing us a bit of delay. We'll be partnering with STEP as usual to gather lessons and improve service to passengers during future impacts. We'll work to schedule spring impacts to avoid community events. Finally, we'll also continue to work on future impacts, and we'll present more details at upcoming RIO meetings. Next slide. Thanks for your time. I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that timeline, and obviously very appreciative of moving the rail replacement up, getting dangerously close to that FIFA World Cup date. So that sounds like a really good change, but I like the visual of the timeline there. That was really helpful. Questions for Pamela? Yeah, go ahead. Board Member Roscoe.
Thank you. Back to slide number 3. Could you just again explain what's being postponed? And I think it's designated by the 4 red triangles versus the red and white diamonds.
Yeah. So the red triangles are confirmed dates. So 3 of those have happened already, the ones in January and the one just this past weekend, the first weekend of February. So the weekend of February 14th is that last red triangle. And then we're holding those 2 contingency dates. One, the 22nd, the weekend of the 22nd of February, and one now we're changing to the first weekend of March, the last weekend of February. And I will say it's likely that we'll need to use one of those for Eastlink work. Which, I've discovered that since I prepared this. And then, as I mentioned, also, we'll probably put that resiliency package in that last triangle weekend there.
Okay, so the red and white stripe indicates contingency.
That's right.
But it does sound like you're already anticipating programming into those.
That's right. Because the events are moving so quickly in between the time when I prepare this and the time when I come speak to you, sometimes I have updates that I'm not able to incorporate.
No, it's totally fine. I was just confused. I thought that the red and white meant that they were no longer needed and that they were they represented projects that you've put off for a time uncertain. So
I should put some kind
Glad
of,
I asked.
some detail maybe on the bottom to show what they mean.
thank you.
Great, thank you, Board Member Roscoe. Any other questions from my colleagues? I did have a question about weather, but you addressed that right at the end. It sounds like cold temperatures do have an impact on this work.
There's two places where cold temperatures, particularly snow and ice, can have an impact. The first is, as you can imagine, on the roof of the Pinehurst Station. When it gets icy, it's a little bit dangerous to work up there. They do tie in, of course, but it's still slippery. And then the other impact is to ice trains. So the ice trains need to run in order to keep the OCS lines clear so we can open the next morning. And so when there are ice trains running all night long, they can't do the work because they have to turn off the OCS to do the work. The other impact could possibly happen this coming weekend of February 14th. If there's a major snow event, they won't be able to run trains between Judkins Park Station and the tunnel. So they're prepared for some weather impacts, but if it's a major event, we would have to postpone.
Gotcha, thanks. CEO Sparman.
Yes, thank you, Chair Walker. Just a quick comment. Pam, thank you for the presentation. Pam mentioned something, I just want to emphasize it. Washington State Department of Transportation has deferred for now the northbound I-5 repair work, which we were all frankly quite concerned about. That was supposed to have started in early March this year. It has been deferred, and the good news with that is that it's been deferred in time. That means at some point it will have to happen, but hopefully by then we will have Line 2 fully integrated with Line 1 operations, which would allow us to provide much higher level of service in the I-5 North corridor. So that's really good news. I just want to emphasize that the Washington-related work has not gone away. It's simply been delayed. Thank you.
Do we know if is the reason for the delay? Are they waiting for
It's
light rail, or
financial.
is it?
It's budget
financial?
related,
Okay.
is what they've been telling us, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. All right, any other questions? It looks like everybody's got their questions answered. Thank you, as always, Pamela, for being here. We've got one more report to the committee, and that is the performance metrics report. And Raj is here in person.
All right. Thank you, Chair Walker and committee members. I'm Raj Cheriel, Director of Enterprise Data and Analytics within the Agency Oversight Department. I appreciate the opportunity to come before this committee today to present on the performance metrics portion of the agenda. As always, please feel free to offer insights or ask questions at any point during the presentation. Before I start, I want to thank the committee for its feedback during our performance metrics presentation on Sounder last month. The committee asked a number of thoughtful questions about the data we provided. We were able to answer some of them during the presentation, and we worked with board admin to provide answers to others. Since then, we've prepared an email to summarize the questions, to provide clearer and more comprehensive answers, and to provide additional data and insights the committee might find useful. In the email, we address the questions around which types of cars saw the most mechanical failures, the count of mechanical failures going back to 2019, whether consist size had an impact on the number of failures, and we offered some additional insight into the customer complaints on overcrowding that we had received in September 2023. If it hasn't already, that email should reach inboxes soon. Please let us know if the committee would like any additional follow-up. Next slide. The focus today is ridership. I've mentioned previously that ridership is an important metric because it serves as a lagging barometer of customer satisfaction and a leading indicator of where to set service levels. For this presentation, I will begin with a description of seasonality. After that, I'll dive into each mode separately and share interesting aspects of ridership based on the data. Today's presentation is for information purposes only, and no action is requested from the committee. Next slide. In previous presentations to this committee and frequently within written reports found in the committee's agenda packets, I've used the term consistent with regular seasonality, or very similar terms to describe a change in ridership that may otherwise appear somewhat dramatic. When I talk about seasonality, I'm referring to what is shown in this chart. On it, I've highlighted average weekday boardings for the months of September through December for each of the last 4 years. As the committee will note, Each year follows a similar pattern: growth from September to October, a big drop from October to November, and then a further drop in December. This is consistent with ridership reported by agencies both locally and nationally. It is tempting to attribute monthly ridership swings to factors present in the moment. And it is true that factors like the opening of link extensions or disruptions that affect the amount of service we can provide do have a significant impact on ridership. However, many of the ridership changes we see month to month are the result of recurring seasonal factors, such as the start of the school year, driving additional transit trips like we see every year in October, and the preponderance of holidays, coupled with cold weather resulting in decreased ridership like we see every year in November and December. Oftentimes, for highly seasonal metrics like ridership, we calculate a rolling 12-month average to normalize for seasonality and get a better picture of the longer-term trend. For ridership, this rolling average trend line gives us a truer indication of whether we are seeing real growth in ridership demand and provides an early indication of the need to add additional capacity to our system. Over the next few months, I'll be working with our business intelligence team to add this trend line to our overall ridership report and post it to the system performance tracker on soundtransit.org. Next slide. This chart comes from the written report included in the committee's agenda packet. It shows actual total boardings on Link for each of the months using bars and compares them to high and low ridership forecasts shown by the black and gray lines respectively. Forecasts are updated each summer for the following year. The forecasts are based on a variety of assumptions and estimates. The assumptions are based on external factors like economic expectations or return to the office policies of major employers, as well as internal factors over which we have direct control, like track repair or the opening of new link extensions. Forecasts estimate not only the extent to which these factors may impact ridership, but also when they will occur. I'd also like to point out the span of the forecast from low to high recognizes the uncertainty of the prediction, an uncertainty that differs significantly across each mode. As the committee will see, when the actual times or magnitude of events differ from the estimates, it can have a profound impact on the accuracy of our predictions. For example, as the chart shows, we didn't predict the extent to which our maintenance projects in January and February of 2024 would impact service and thus ridership. In addition, when we did the forecast for 2024, we predicted an October opening for the Linwood extension. The fact that it opened earlier created the difference seen between actual and forecast ridership for September 2024. Alternatively, in that same forecast, we correctly predicted the opening of the Line 2 starter line in April 2024, which is why actual ridership fell squarely between the low and high forecasts. Next slide. This slide dives a little deeper into Link ridership by showing the number of boardings by station for the months of October and November 2024. I apologize for it being a little difficult to read, but the stations go geographically north to south, with Linwood Station on the left and Angle Lake to the far right. A couple of interesting things about this chart include we continue to have a high proportion of boardings at terminus stations, which may suggest we are appealing to a broader market of riders north of Linwood Station and to the south of the Angle Lake Station. Westlake Station continues to see the greatest number of boardings, which may be a function of it being the station at which commuters are most likely to board for their return trip heading either north or south. Compared to prior time periods, the Capitol Hill Station experiences a comparably high number of boardings, which is driven by disproportionately large numbers on the weekends. Finally, SeaTac shows a higher proportion of boardings for these months, especially with December added in, than it does the rest of the year, which likely speaks to the use of Link for holiday travel. Next slide. Let's move on to ST Express and look at forecasted ridership compared to actual. The first thing the committee might notice is how closely actual ridership mimic the forecast. Not only does actual ridership consistently fall within the low and high forecast, but month-to-month changes in actual ridership reflect the month-to-month changes in the forecast. For example, actual ridership dipped just like the forecast predicted in June 2024. It is worth noting that the forecasts reflect expectations around route restructuring associated with the opening of Linwood extensions. However, the forecast made in 2023 did not anticipate the additions of Route 510 and Route 515 service in the I-5 North corridor between Snohomish County and Seattle. Regardless, they still largely aligned with actual ridership. Next slide. Speaking of service in the I-5 North corridor, I wanted to share this chart, which takes another look at ST Express ridership by describing the number of boardings by the corridor traveled. Of note is the relative size of the two east side corridors, I-90 and SR 520, shown by the dark green bar near the top and the yellow bar below it. As the committee will see, taken together, east side corridors generate roughly double the ridership coming from the south end into Seattle along I-5 and over 4 times as many boardings as the I-5 North corridor. Interestingly, the north and south I-405 corridors together generate about as much ridership as the I-5 North corridor alone. Next slide. This slide compares actual Sounder boardings with the high and low forecast for the period of October 2023 through November 2024. One thing of note is that Sounder forecasts offer the largest span from low to high as a percentage than any of the other modes. This is largely due to the uncertainty of the return to office policies of the region's major employers, coupled with Sounder's orientation to the commuter market. Despite the large span, the even slower than predicted adoption of return to office policies has likely kept actual Sounder boardings near or below the low forecast. In fact, as the committee may have noticed within the written report, Sounder seems to have stabilized at about 45% of its pre-pandemic ridership, with the month-to-month changes being a function of the seasonality I described earlier. One of the other aspects of Sounder ridership that the committee might find interesting is which stations see the highest percentage of boardings. While not shown specifically on this chart, I can tell you that focusing on northbound trips on the South Line, both the Puyallup and Tacoma Dome stations each see 20% of the boardings, followed by the Kent station at 18% and Auburn at 16%. Next slide. In contrast to Sounder ridership performance against forecast, T-Line ridership has been nearer the high forecast for many of the months in 2024. Notably, the high forecast for T-Line has been kept relatively conservative based on expected return to office policies in the city of Tacoma. Similarly to Sounder, looking at boardings by station shows that roughly 21% occur at the Tacoma Dome station, 15% at Union Station, 12% at the Theater District station, and 10% each at the Stadium and St. Joseph stations. Next slide. I hope this presentation helped offer some of the examples of how we analyze ridership data, as well as how we anticipate and plan for forecasted changes in ridership. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you for your time and do my best to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Raj. Really appreciate this presentation, very clear and useful. Questions from the committee? Board Member Rasko.
I don't really know my question yet, except I am very intrigued by slide 7 with the average daily ST Express boardings by corridor. And I am making an assumption and wonder how staff feels about this around the lack of link service as compared to these boardings. In that, when I see I-5 South King, I visualize Angle Lake and SeaTac link station boardings. And then 405 North, 405 South, I-90. So I just want to confirm what I think I'm seeing in relation to the ST Express bus I rode this morning from Tacoma Dome here. That was represented in these dark green and medium green on the bottom. And had Link been coming to Tacoma Dome, that I would not have been on an ST Express bus. Is that correct?
Yes, I think the provision of alternative modes has a profound impact on the number of boardings you're seeing by by corridor.
By corridor.
And you point out an excellent example in the trip from Tacoma to Seattle, which could be served also by the Sounder or traveling north and catching the link at either Angle Lake or SeaTac.
Okay, and then I'll just point out, because I know this is a decision that is on our horizon, at least in 2035. Chair Walker and I got here in a very short time, which would not be the case if we were on Sounder or Link. So that's my little plug for not abandoning the ST Express buses from Pierce County altogether when Link gets down there finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Roscoe, and I will second those comments. Any other questions from committee members? All right, well, again, thank you for the information. Thank you, as always, for the monthly performance report. I do hang on to that every month and reference it, so thank you. We have one more item on our agenda today, and that is to discuss the 2025 Rider Experience and Operations Committee work plan. We did take a look at this at our last meeting. A number of you had some comments and feedback. This is the last time that it will be on the agenda officially, but it is a working document. So if there are any additional topics you think about later, please feel free to let me know or let Hunter know. Last month, there was a request to review the list of special topics for 2025 and note if any presentations were carried over from 2024. Staff completed that review and confirmed that all of our 2024 special topics were presented and that the topics listed on our 2025 plan are new for this year. So thank you for that question from the committee, and thank you, staff, for doing that review. Are there any other topics the committee would like to add to the work plan or any other discussion on the work plan? All right, seeing none, we will use that plan as our general outline for the rest of the year. And again, please don't hesitate to add items as they come up for you. We do not have an executive session today. Is there any other business to come before the committee? All right, seeing none, the next Rider Experience and Operations Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, March 6th at 1 p.m. right here in the Ruth Fisher Boardroom and virtually via Zoom. The link to join the virtual meeting will be provided at the Sound Transit website and on the meeting agenda. Thank you, and we are adjourned.